1955, Pakistan. No one had a reflection in the girls' dormitory. The Murree Asylum file. In the winter of 1955, the mountains of Murree were white with snow, the air sharp and biting. A small, nondescript asylum sat tucked between pine trees, its walls gray and unwelcoming. That year, a group of girls arrived. No one knew exactly where they came from. Their records were incomplete, their names whispered quietly among the staff. But what drew attention immediately was not their past. It was their silence. They didn't cry when they were frightened. They didn't laugh when they were told jokes. They moved together like shadows, as if invisible strings connected them. The staff tried to speak to them, to coax them into conversation, but the girls only nodded or shook their heads. Their eyes were wide, unnerving in their stillness. It was as if they had left something behind in the world they came from. From the first day, whispers began. Staff members noticed odd patterns. Meals untouched, beds neatly made without anyone claiming responsibility, and a chilling quiet that fell over the dormitory at all hours. Even the janitor, a man who had worked in Murree for decades, said he had never experienced anything like it. "It's like the air itself has changed," he muttered one morning, staring at the hallway where the girls walked in perfect unison. The local townspeople heard stories too. Mothers warned their children not to go near the asylum, claiming the girls had a strange stillness that made the air feel heavy. But curiosity always won. One girl from a nearby village tried to sneak a peek through the tall iron gates. She swore later that when she looked at the girls, it was like staring at shadows that didn't belong to the world. She never spoke about it again, at least not openly. Inside the asylum, things grew stranger. The girls didn't speak, but they watched. Staff members often felt their presence, even when the girls were supposedly in another room. Footsteps seemed to echo without anyone walking. Doors creaked open by themselves, and cold drafts brushed past the necks of caretakers who were sure they had closed every window. The headmistress, a woman named Begum Nazir, tried to assert control. She was used to managing difficult wards and had a reputation for strict discipline. Yet even she couldn't command the girls. When she raised her voice, they didn't flinch. When she tried to comfort them, they recoiled, not with fear, but with a kind of quiet accusation, as if her words had no meaning in their world. Rumors spread that the girls were not entirely human, that they had come from a place beyond normal comprehension. Some claimed they were spirits, trapped between life and death. Others whispered darker possibilities, things so terrible that even the adults dared not speak them aloud. Yet, no matter the speculation, one thing was undeniable. The arrival of these girls changed the asylum forever. The first night was the hardest. Staff reported a silence so deep it pressed on the chest, a weight that made breathing difficult. The girls huddled together in the dormitory, and not a single one slept. They simply stared at the darkened walls, eyes glinting in candlelight, unmoving. Every tick of the clock felt amplified, echoing in the minds of everyone who tried to sleep. Something had entered the asylum that night, something unexplainable, and it had no intention of leaving. No one in Murree would ever forget the day the silent girls arrived. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, anticipating the horrors that were about to unfold behind the asylum's gray walls. Shadows had come alive, and no one knew why, or how they had chosen this place. It started with something small, a reflection that didn't match reality. The girls' dormitory was lined with old, tarnished mirrors. Staff placed them there to help the girls dress, to teach them to comb their hair, to look at themselves. But the mirrors were useless. Or worse, they betrayed the truth. The first caretaker to notice was a young woman named Amina. She was folding laundry when she glanced up at the mirror behind the dresser. One of the girls, a pale, thin girl with hollow eyes, stood in front of it. Amina blinked and rubbed her eyes. There was nothing. No reflection. Not a shadow. Not a blur. Not a hint that she existed in that mirror at all. Amina froze. Her heart thudded against her ribs. She whispered to the girl, "Do you see yourself?" The girl tilted her head slowly, her silence louder than words. Amina's voice caught in her throat, as she realized she hadn't imagined it. Not one of the girls had a reflection. When she reported it to the headmistress, Begum Nazir frowned. "It must be some trick of the glass," she said firmly. But Amina knew better. Over the next days, she watched more girls in the mirrors. Always the same. Empty. No one reflected. The dormitory grew tense. Staff began avoiding the mirrors altogether. Even the headmistress caught herself glancing in one and feeling the chill of absence. It was like staring at a void that refused to acknowledge the world. Nights were worse. Candlelight flickered across the glass, casting shapes that seemed alive, shapes that were not there. But the girls themselves remained untouched by their own reflections. Rumors began to circulate. Some said the mirrors had been cursed long ago, that the asylum had been built on land where terrible things happened. Others whispered about spirits, claiming the girls were not of this world, and the mirrors refused to capture what the eyes could not comprehend. One evening, a young doctor assigned to the asylum decided to investigate. He placed candles around the room, and one by one, he asked the girls to look at themselves. Some obeyed, some refused. The results were the same. Blankness. A haunting emptiness stared back at him, where a reflection should have been. That night, strange sounds echoed through the dormitory. Footsteps in the halls, whispers without words, the scraping of chairs against the wooden floors. The mirrors seemed to pulse, reflecting not the girls, but something else. Shadows that moved independently, watching, waiting. The doctor left trembling, never to mention it again. The girls themselves never reacted to their lack of reflection. They went about their days silently, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned with what the world saw. It was the staff who suffered, haunted by the knowledge that these girls existed in a way that defied reality. By the end of the week, the mirrors had become forbidden. Doors were propped open to avoid them. Candles were placed strategically to block their surfaces. And yet, the feeling lingered. A constant, suffocating awareness that the dormitory was no longer just a place for healing, but a place where the very laws of nature had been suspended. No one knew why the girls lacked reflections. Scholars, mystics, even local priests were consulted. Everyone offered theories, none offered answers. And in Murree, the town below the asylum, whispers grew louder. People began to avoid the road leading to the asylum, fearing that to look too closely would draw them into the same emptiness. The mirrors did not lie. They revealed a truth too terrible to comprehend. And the truth was this: the girls were there, but they were not fully of the world that held the living. Night fell over the Murree Asylum like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Snow pressed against the windows, the wind whistling through cracks in the old walls. Inside the girls' dormitory, the atmosphere was thick with something unspoken, something that pressed down on every breath. Staff members began to notice it almost immediately. The whispers. They were faint at first, like the hiss of wind through the pine trees outside. But soon, they became unmistakable. Low, sibilant murmurs that seemed to crawl along the walls. No one could understand the words, and yet the sound carried an unmistakable weight. Anger, sorrow, warning. Caretakers tried to ignore it. They told themselves it was the wind, the old pipes, their imaginations running wild. But by the second week, the whispers had a rhythm, a pattern. They rose and fell with the girls' movements, always surrounding them, always following them. Sometimes, the whispers would stop abruptly, leaving a silence so heavy that even the beating of one's own heart felt intrusive. Then came the doors. One night, Amina, the young caretaker, returned to check on the dormitory before heading to the staff quarters. She found one of the heavy wooden doors, the one leading to the storage room, slightly ajar. She could have sworn she had locked it. Her hands shook as she pushed it closed, and yet when she turned back moments later, it stood open again. Other staff experienced the same. Locked doors swung open on their own. Keys vanished from pockets. Latches clicked without cause. Some claimed to see shadows slipping past the doorway, elongated and twisted, like smoke given shape. No one dared to follow. The girls themselves seemed untouched by the disturbances. They moved silently, unhurried, as though the building's strange behavior was a normal part of their world. But the staff could feel it, an invisible force, heavy and oppressive, moving through the halls and rooms, keeping watch. Sleep became a rare commodity. Caretakers reported waking to cold drafts brushing their faces, the sound of someone, or something, moving softly across the floor. One night, Begum Nazir was roused by a scraping noise outside her door. She opened it slowly, and the hallway was empty. Just the whispers, curling through the air like smoke, impossible to pin down. The girls' dormitory seemed alive, but alive in a way that was not human. Walls groaned, floors creaked, and the very air vibrated with tension. Even the bravest staff avoided walking alone after lights out. A sense of dread had settled, invisible but undeniable, pressing down like snow on the roof above. Local rumors began to spread. Some townspeople swore that the asylum was haunted, that the girls had brought with them a darkness that no one could understand. Others whispered of curses, of spirits that had been bound to the place long before the asylum existed. But no one had answers, and no one dared stay long enough to see the truth. By the third week, the night whispers had become a ritual. They would start as the sun dipped behind the mountains, rising and falling, swirling through the dormitory, through the corridors, through the hearts of those who lived in fear. Staff would glance at each other nervously, never speaking of what they heard. And always, the girls remained silent, their eyes wide, unblinking, aware of everything and revealing nothing. Among the staff, there was one woman who seemed different, older, quieter, and far more attentive than the others. Her name was Zainab, and she had been at the Murree Asylum longer than anyone could remember. Where others saw silence, she saw patterns. Where others felt dread, she felt curiosity. Zainab knew things. Not the official records, not the daily logs of arrivals and departures. She knew secrets buried deep within the asylum's walls, secrets that had been whispered to her in shadowed corners, in moments no one else had noticed. Staff dismissed her stories as old superstition, but there was something in the way she watched the girls that made even the headmistress uneasy. One evening, Amina noticed Zainab speaking softly to one of the silent girls, her lips barely moving. The girl nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and then turned to sit quietly on her bed. Amina asked Zainab what she had said. Zainab's face remained unreadable. "I was merely asking her if she is comfortable," she replied. But the calm in her tone was thin, like a veil hiding a storm. Zainab had access to the asylum's hidden corners. Rooms no other staff were allowed to enter, closets filled with strange objects, drawers stuffed with letters that no one had read. Late at night, she would move silently through the halls, her presence unnoticed except by the girls themselves. They did not flinch at her arrival. They followed her with their eyes, yet remained perfectly still, as if understanding her in ways the others could not. It was said that Zainab had been entrusted with the asylum's darkest truth, the origin of the girls. She had promised to protect them, to guard the secret from anyone who might misuse it. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. One night, a young nurse followed Zainab, hoping to uncover what she did during her nightly rounds. She found the older woman kneeling before a small, hidden door beneath the stairs. The door was covered with symbols, strange carvings that seemed to pulse in the candlelight. The nurse froze as she heard Zainab whisper a single word, a word that seemed older than the mountains themselves. The girls were watching, silent as always, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. Then Zainab closed the door, and the nurse never spoke of what she saw again. Zainab carried the weight of knowledge like a living thing pressing against her chest. She understood the danger surrounding the girls, the unnatural force that kept them silent and reflectionless. And she knew that if the truth were ever exposed, the entire asylum, and perhaps the town of Murree itself, could be consumed by the darkness that had taken root within its walls. Yet despite the burden, Zainab remained composed. She cared for the girls with an intensity that was almost maternal, guiding them through routines, ensuring their needs were met, shielding them from staff and outsiders alike. But the moments when she was alone in the hidden corners of the asylum, whispering to shadows no one else could see, revealed a fear she could never fully hide, a fear that the secret she protected might one day demand a price too terrible to pay. By the time the staff realized Zainab was different, it was already too late. She had woven herself into the girl's world, becoming the bridge between the living and the unknown. And whatever lay behind that hidden door beneath the stairs, it was clear Zainab had made a choice. She would protect the girls and the secret of the Murree Asylum with everything she had, even if it meant sacrificing herself. The dormitory watched. The walls listened, and Zainab, silent and resolute, understood that some secrets were never meant to leave the darkness. The disappearances began quietly, almost imperceptibly. A girl would be present in the morning, walking the halls, folding her blanket, or quietly reading in the common room. By evening, she would be gone. Not missing in the conventional sense. No open windows, no broken locks, but vanished as if the world had swallowed her whole. At first, the staff assumed she had wandered outside or been taken home. Yet the asylum was remote, surrounded by snow-laden forests and steep hills. Escape was impossible. Search parties found nothing. No footprints in the snow, no traces of struggle, nothing to indicate she had ever left. The headmistress, Begum Nazir, grew frantic. She questioned every staff member, scoured the rooms, and even consulted local authorities. Still, there were no answers. The girls remaining in the dormitory offered no clues. They moved and ate and slept as if nothing had changed, as if the missing girls had never existed. It was Zainab who first noticed a pattern. She observed the empty beds, the untouched belongings, and the faintest signs in the walls. Small scratches, depressions in the floor, subtle shifts in the air. She realized that disappearances were tied to the dormitory itself, to something within the walls. But the girls remained untouched. It was as though they were part of a different world, one that intersected with reality in strange and terrifying ways. One night, Amina stayed late to finish laundry. The dormitory was silent, and snow pressed against the windows. She heard a soft rustle, then the faintest whisper. Turning slowly, she saw one of the girls, who had vanished only days before, standing in the shadows near the mirrors. But when Amina blinked, the girl was gone. Her bed remained neatly made. The empty space seemed normal, as if her presence had been erased entirely. Panic began to spread among the staff. Each disappearance made the dormitory heavier, darker, as though the walls themselves were feeding on something. The girls, still silent, were no longer just observers. They were the center of a force that none could understand. And the staff who dared to question it found themselves trapped in a web of fear and uncertainty. Local townspeople whispered that the girls were spirits, that the asylum had been cursed the moment it opened its doors. Others claimed that the mountains surrounding Murree held an ancient magic, one that had been awakened by the arrival of the silent girls. Yet all theories fell short. No one could explain why the girls were immune, or why the walls seemed to consume only certain residents. By the third disappearance, the dormitory had become a place of dread. Staff avoided walking alone. Caretakers whispered prayers as they moved through the halls. Even Begum Nazir, once resolute and commanding, trembled when passing the dormitory door. The girls, unaffected by the chaos, went about their routines, their eyes reflecting knowledge that the staff could not hope to grasp. And then the fourth girl vanished. This time, it happened in plain sight. A caretaker watched as the girl walked across the room, paused near the mirror, and simply disappeared. Not into a corner or under a bed, just gone. The caretaker screamed, but the others arrived to find nothing. No footprints, no disturbance, only the faint echo of the girl's laughter, suspended in the air like smoke. By now, fear had settled like a permanent guest in the asylum. Staff whispered of walls that breathed, mirrors that concealed, and a dormitory that held its own dark will. The girls were at the center of it all, untouched and unafraid, and no one could predict who would vanish next, or if anyone would survive the night. It started with a single envelope. Amina found it tucked between the pages of a ledger in the staff office. The paper was yellowed and brittle, edges curled from age. There was no handwriting, only symbols, strange and looping, that seemed almost alive under the dim light of the desk lamp. She shivered and set it aside, hoping it was just a prank from some mischievous coworker. But it was only the beginning. More letters appeared, always in places where no one had left them, inside drawers under pillows between floorboards. They were never addressed to anyone, yet they carried a weight, a message written not with ink, but with intent. The symbols seemed to pulse, almost like a heartbeat, stirring something deep in the mind of anyone who looked too closely. The letters told stories. Stories of the girls' arrival, of nights where shadows moved with purpose, of whispers that shaped the walls themselves. But the words were never complete. Sentences would trail off mid-thought, symbols fading into scratches as though the message was being erased by an invisible hand. Zainab took notice first. She recognized the language, or something like it. She claimed it was older than anyone living, older than the mountains surrounding Murree. She said the letters were not meant for humans, that they carried instructions, warnings, and secrets meant only for the girls and those who protected them. But even Zainab could not fully interpret their meaning. One night, Amina stayed behind to try and decipher one of the letters. She spread it on the desk, candlelight flickering across the strange symbols. As she traced the curves with her fingers, the air around her grew colder. A faint whisper curled through the room, low and urgent. The candle trembled, casting shadows that danced across the walls. She looked up, and for a brief moment, one of the girls was standing silently at the doorway. No reflection, eyes wide, unblinking. Then the girl vanished. The letters also hinted at the disappearances. Names were circled, lines drawn connecting rooms, mirrors, and hallways. It was as if someone, or something, had been charting the girl's movements, mapping a plan that no human mind could fully grasp. And yet, the letters carried more than instructions. They carried warnings. They spoke of consequences, of dangers that lurked in the shadows and waited for anyone who tried to intervene. Staff began to fear the letters as much as the girls themselves. Reading them brought headaches, nausea, and an inexplicable sense of guilt. Many swore that the symbols crawled on the page, twisting when unobserved, shifting into shapes that hinted at things too terrible to name. The letters were alive, and they were watching. Despite the warnings, curiosity persisted. Some staff tried to destroy the letters, but they always returned, folded neatly, appearing in the same places as though delivered by unseen hands. It became impossible to ignore. The asylum itself was communicating through them, and the girls were the medium. By the end of the week, every caretaker knew to respect the letters. They were more than paper and ink. They were the voice of the dormitory, the whisper of a world beyond understanding, and a warning that whatever force held the girls in silence was far older and far more powerful than any living human. The asylum was alive. The letters were proof, and the girls, silent as ever, were at its center. Winter in Murree is unforgiving. By late January, the mountains were buried under feet of snow, and the wind howled like a living thing through the pine trees. That year, the storm came faster than anyone expected. Roads disappeared under drifts, and communication with the town below was cut off entirely. The asylum was trapped, isolated, and suffocating under the weight of ice and silence. The storm began quietly, a whisper of snow at first, but by nightfall, it had grown into a roaring tempest. Windows rattled in their frames, doors groaned on old hinges, and snow pressed against the walls like a living hand, desperate to get inside. Inside the dormitory, the girls were calm, silent as always, as if the storm outside was of no consequence. But the staff felt it. Every gust of wind, every crack of ice against the roof seemed to carry a warning. That night, the whispers returned, louder than ever. They swirled through the corridors, carried on the icy drafts that snuck beneath doors. The letters from the shadows had warned of this night, though no one fully understood how. The staff tried to stay composed, moving through the dormitory with hurried steps, but the girls watched, unmoved, eyes shining in candlelight that trembled against the gusts of the storm. By midnight, chaos had set in. One of the heavier doors slammed shut and could not be opened. Others creaked violently, threatening to give way under pressure no human hand could exert. Footsteps echoed down hallways, though no one walked. Shadows twisted unnaturally, stretching along walls, slipping across ceilings. The staff huddled together, praying, whispering reassurances that felt hollow even as they spoke them. Then it happened. One of the girls disappeared in the middle of the dormitory, leaving behind only a faint outline in the snow-like dust that had collected on the floorboards. Another vanished moments later, and then another. The staff screamed, but the storm outside drowned out every sound. Begum Nazir tried to call for help, to rally the remaining girls and caretakers, but the dormitory seemed to pulse with its own will, trapping them in the nightmare. Amina caught a glimpse of Zainab, kneeling before the hidden door beneath the stairs. She was muttering words that seemed older than the mountains themselves, tracing symbols in the air. The remaining girls gathered around her silently, forming a circle that glowed faintly in the candlelight. The whispers were deafening now, wrapping around every heart, every thought, every breath. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had become meaningless in the storm. When the first rays of morning pierced the clouds, the storm had subsided. Snow drifted silently against the walls. The dormitory, though battered, stood as if untouched. But the staff knew better. Several girls were gone, vanished without a trace, without warning. The surviving girls were calm, as always, their silence unbroken, their reflections still absent. And Zainab, she looked older, haggard, but resolute, carrying the weight of a night that no one else could understand, a night that had sealed the fate of the asylum in ways that would haunt Murree forever. Outside, the town remained unaware of the horrors that had unfolded above in the mountains. But within the dormitory, something had changed. The walls themselves seemed alive, holding the echoes of a storm that was not entirely of this world, and a secret that could never be unraveled. News of the disappearances began to reach Murree town slowly. Families, who had sent their daughters to the asylum in hopes of education or care, realized something was terribly wrong. One mother, Fatima, was the first to take action. Her daughter, Aisha, had been silent and pale since her arrival, but when the snowstorm ended, Aisha was gone. Fatima traveled to the asylum immediately, snow crunching beneath her boots, breath misting in the frozen air. She pleaded with the staff to explain, to tell her where her daughter had gone. Begum Nazir tried to calm her, citing confusion or misunderstandings, but Fatima was unconvinced. She felt the dormitory's presence before she even entered, the oppressive weight in the air, the silent eyes that seemed to follow her every step. Inside, the girls were calm, as always. Fatima's cries echoed through the halls, met with silence. No one answered. No footsteps approached. And when she looked into the mirrors, she shivered. There were no reflections, not her own, not her daughter's. The dormitory had swallowed them both, or perhaps revealed that they had never belonged entirely to this world. Fatima refused to leave. She began searching every corner, every hidden nook Zainab had once moved through in silence. She asked questions, but only Zainab seemed to respond, speaking in riddles and warnings. "You cannot take her," the older woman said softly. "She is not lost, but neither is she free." Fatima did not understand. She demanded answers. At night, she slept fitfully in the staff quarters, haunted by whispers. The dormitory's strange power seemed to press against her mind, making dreams vivid, terrifying, and impossibly real. She would see shadows reach from the mirrors, girls standing in impossible angles, doors opening into endless black hallways. Every time she woke, the silence of the dormitory pressed against her chest like stone. Other families arrived as well. Mothers, fathers, and siblings traveled across snow-covered hills to plead for their children. Each was met with the same chilling calm. The girls remained silent. The dormitory held its breath, keeping its secrets close. And the staff, they trembled behind the desks, unwilling or unable to reveal the truth. Despite their efforts, nothing changed. The missing girls remained missing. Some who stayed too long reported hearing their daughters calling from within the walls, their voices warped, distant, echoing in ways that no human space should allow. Others swore they caught glimpses of their children in the shadows, watching silently, eyes wide, never blinking. Fatima refused to accept it. She remained outside the dormitory each day, hands pressed against the cold iron gates, willing her daughter back. Yet the dormitory, the girls, and the whispers seemed impenetrable. Even Zainab, who had guided so many in silence, could not, or would not, intervene. The search became an obsession. Murree itself felt the ripple of desperation. Families whispered of curses, of unnatural powers, of a dormitory that did not belong entirely to this world. Fatima's hope grew into fear, and fear into despair. And through it all, the girls remained calm, untouched by panic, their reflections absent, their existence tied to something far older than anyone dared imagine. The mother's desperate search was more than grief. It was a confrontation with the impossible, a battle against forces that could not be seen, could not be touched, and yet were everywhere, waiting, patient, and eternal. The final night arrived without warning. A silence had settled over the Murree Asylum, heavier than ever, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Snow pressed against the windows, thick and suffocating. The wind had died, leaving only an eerie stillness that seemed unnatural. Staff moved cautiously, aware that something terrible was about to happen. The girls were unusually restless, pacing silently, their eyes wide and unblinking. Even Zainab, resolute and composed for weeks, seemed tense, whispering to the shadows in corners no one dared enter. Something ancient, something patient, had awoken fully within the dormitory. It began with the mirrors. Candlelight flickered against the glass, and for the first time, shadows moved independently of the girls. Shapes twisted and stretched, crawling along walls, over ceilings, through doorways. The whispers returned, louder, sharper, urgent and accusatory. Staff tried to gather the girls, to corral them into safety, but the dormitory refused. Doors slammed shut, hallways shifted in ways that made navigation impossible. Screams echoed, not just from the staff, but from the very walls themselves, as though the building were alive and protesting their presence. One by one, staff members disappeared, leaving behind only an echo of their last cries. The remaining girls watched silently, like witnesses to an event older than time. Zainab moved among them, her whispers forming a strange rhythm, a chant of protection and warning. She guided some of the girls to the hidden stairwell, tracing symbols that glowed faintly in the candlelight. For a moment, hope seemed possible. Perhaps some could escape, but the dormitory would not release them so easily. Outside, the storm returned, a roaring curtain of snow and wind that battered the building. Inside, chaos reigned. Shadows coalesced into forms that no human mind could endure. The girls, still silent, became the center of it all, their eyes reflecting the horror and the strange calm of beings caught between worlds. By dawn, the dormitory was eerily quiet. Snow lay thick on the floors, and footprints were gone. Staff members were gone. Only the girls remained, silent, untouched, reflections absent as always. Zainab, older and weary, stood at the doorway to the hidden room beneath the stairs. She had done everything she could, but some forces could not be tamed. The town of Murree would hear rumors, whispers of screams carried by the wind, tales of staff lost in the night, of girls who were more than human, and of an asylum that seemed to exist outside of time. But no one could know the full truth. The dormitory had consumed its own, preserved its secret, and left behind only silence, and the girls, whose reflections would never return. The last night marked the end of an era for the Murree Asylum, but it also marked the beginning of a mystery that would haunt the mountains forever. The walls retained memory, the mirrors held absence, and the girls remained, silent witnesses to a night no living soul could ever forget. Decades have passed since the events in the Murree Asylum. The building itself has long since been abandoned, walls crumbling, windows shattered, doors hanging loosely on rusted hinges. Nature has begun to reclaim the place. Snow, wind, and time have erased the footprints, the whispers, and the echoes of that fateful winter. Yet the mystery endures. Locals tell stories of the girls who arrived silently, their reflections absent, their presence impossible to ignore. Travelers claim that on quiet nights, when the wind whistles through the mountains just right, you can hear soft whispers carried down from the ruins. Some swear they see shapes moving behind broken windows, shadows that shift independently of the wind. No records explain what truly happened. The girls who vanished, or perhaps transcended, were never found. The staff, those who survived, never spoke publicly of the night when the dormitory seemed alive, when the mirrors betrayed reality, and when shadows claimed what they desired. Their silence became part of the legend, a chilling confirmation that some truths are too terrifying to share. Researchers and thrill seekers occasionally visit the site, hoping to uncover the truth, but none stay long. Cameras fail, lights flicker, compasses spin, and a sense of being watched grows too heavy to bear. The Murree Asylum refuses to be understood. It exists as it always has, a place caught between worlds, tethered to events no one can fully explain. The girls themselves remain an enigma. Silent, reflectionless, untouched by time, they became the heart of a mystery that refuses to end. Were they spirits, victims, or something far older? No one can say, and perhaps that is exactly how it was meant to be. The Murree Asylum has gone in form, but not in memory. It lingers in whispers, in the snow-swept mountains, in stories told with a shiver. And somewhere, in the shadows of a forgotten dormitory, the girls wait, watching silently, their reflections absent, their secret eternal. The Murree mystery remains, and always will.